My name is Rick Lewis. I'm with Phenom Hoop Report. On today's segment of Coach's Corner, I have a very special person and friend. I got Dwayne Cherry. Welcome, Coach.
Thank you, Coach. Thank you so much for having me.
All the honor is all ours. Hey, Coach, you started back in 2009. You were an assistant coach under Preston Davis at Independence, and you were also the head coach of the JV program at a point in time. In my personal opinion, I think Preston Davis is one of the most underrated coaches in the entire state of North Carolina. What lessons did you learn by being an assistant coach under Preston Davis?
Preston taught me a lot, and he and I had known each other for years. I was coaching middle school ball in CMS at J.T. Williams Middle School, and he was coaching JV at West Charlotte, and he was also applying for the head spot at Independence. And he told me, he said that if he got that position, he wanted me to come on board to help him with varsity and be his head JV coach. So obviously he got the position, and he brought me on board with him. Preston is a hard worker, and he has high expectations, and he holds his kids to those standards. And that's one of the first things that I learned, that he would not lower the bar, regardless of his talent level. He kept the bar high for his kids, and they had to meet that. And you would see that when he got to Independence, the program wasn't particularly in a good spot. But slowly but surely, the kids began to meet the expectations and the standards that he had. And I learned, from day in and day out being with him, how he ran his practice, how he ran his film sessions, the accountability to which he held his players to, not just on the court, but off the court, because he would also monitor what they were doing in the classroom academically as well. So guys knew they had to perform in the classroom, or else, there were consequences on the court, or either they just wouldn't be able to play. I remember one story, and he and I laugh about it now. I was the head JV coach at the time, and I showed up to practice, and 3 or 4 of my guys were sitting on the sideline, not able to practice. And I'm looking a little confused, like, what's going on? And he said, they're not meeting the academic requirements that he had set. Wow. It wasn't so much the school. He had set his own academic requirements, and the guys knew what they were, but they hadn't met those standards, so they had to sit out that practice. So it was things like that, and that was his first time being the head of a program, but you could see, based on his college playing experience, the experiences he had coaching at West Charlotte with Coach Terry, he had learned a lot of other things as well that he had brought along board. And I just took mental notes, being on the sideline and watching his game management, because it was a tough league that we were in that year. Hopewell was very good, and West Charlotte was very good. Kenny Meeks and those guys were just getting there. So I just took all of those notes and things that I had observed from being with him, and I said, if I ever get my own program, I'm going to implement some of those things.
Well, in 2010, you got your opportunity, and you became the head coach at Charlotte Country Day. What was it like going from a public school to a private school?
It was a transition. I had taught in CMS for about 6 or 7 years at that point. I think one of the things that helped make the transition a little smoother was that I was alumni from Country Day.
Okay.
So I did have some private school experience. Some of the coaches that I had played for, some of the teachers that taught me, they were still there. So as far as being back on campus as a faculty member, because I teach geometry and algebra 1, that made the transition pretty smooth, because I had people there that I could talk to as far as faculty work. From an athletic standpoint, some of my coaches were there. And the first coach that I went to when I got the position was Coach Bob Whitman, who was at the time the head of the football program. And he had won numerous state championships. So I wanted to ask him and pick his brain about, how do you build a successful program here? So he and I had a great interview, and he talked about the accountability piece as well. And he also said it takes talent. You got to have talent to win. Right. So using those older coaches, Coach Al Pearman, who I ran track for, and my coach, who I played for at Country Day, was very instrumental, Coach Kevin Daly. Played for him in the early 90s when I was at Country Day, and we had some of the most successful runs there. My senior year there, we were 23-4. Now, it wasn't really because of me. I wasn't the star of the team or anything, but I knew Coach was familiar with that type of setting, because the independent school setting is a little different from the public school setting. But I think that helped, having those older coaches there that I had played for and that had experience doing that. The coaches in the conference were very welcoming. They were very Sean Brown, Chris Berger, Brian Field. Those guys were very welcoming. Che Roth, he wasn't there at the time at Cannon. And Covenant Day was not in the conference yet. So they were not a part of our conference at that point. But those other coaches also helped. I got their cell phone numbers immediately. If I had any questions about how things were done in the conference, or if I had questions about my own program because they had done it before, I could call them or text them and pick their brain. And they were it was a great fraternity, so to speak, that we had in that conference as coaches.
I was going to say that was a killer conference because at the point in time, you know, Charlotte Christian was very successful. Of course, Providence Day had their tremendous run where they went to the Nationals at Geico's. Cannon's been good over the years. So Charlotte Latin. So it's a who's who as far as coaches and also the quality of teams in your conference. So I'm sure that was probably pretty tough. And I'm sure once you got over there, you had to rebuild some of the tradition. But how difficult was it to build a winning culture when you first got the job at Charlotte Country Day?
It was tough because, like you say, the conference is extremely competitive. And I'm a competitive person, so I'm coming in with the mindset of we're going to build this thing all the way up to be state contenders. But looking at the conference, at the time, like you say, Charlotte Christian at that time was the top team in the conference. Anthony Gill was there.
Right.
Patrick Rooks was there. They were loaded. You had a young Trey Fields coming up through the pipeline. And Sean Brown is an outstanding coach. That was one of the first things that really got my attention. Every coach in the conference was so good. And you saw that each night your team had to be prepared because game plans were thorough. You would play a Charlotte Latin with Chris Berger, who wasn't extremely loaded with talent, but the X's and O's were absolutely tremendous. He got the most out of his guys every year. So one of the first things I realized coaching in that conference was we have to be prepared every single night. Regardless of who you're playing, you cannot take a night off. So I knew right away, looking at the talent that we were up against, we had to try to build that foundation. So I started working with the younger guys in the middle school because I knew in 2 or 3 years they were going to be at our upper school campus. So I'd make visits down to the middle school periodically during the day. Wouldn't even be so much basketball, but just sort of showing my face, trying to build relationships with those kids. I may stop by the cafeteria for lunch, sit down and talk to the guys. I may drop in on a PE class and have a good conversation with those guys. And then, we'd also invite them to team camp because we wanted the entire program to be at team camp and not just the high school guys.
Right.
I wanted the younger players to see how we do things at the high school. And it also gave me a chance to work with them during the summer. So for our summer workouts at the upper school campus, everyone was invited. So we'd have the rising 7th graders working out with rising seniors. We'd have some of those older varsity guys instructing them on how we come off of a ball screen or how we make a certain cut without the basketball. And I thought it was very beneficial. And it made those guys excited about wanting to be at the upper school and one day playing on the varsity team. So that summertime, we really hit hard with trying to build a program. What we would also do during the season is I would have the JV and the varsity guys go down to the middle school to watch a game. We'd pick out a game on the schedule. So those younger guys would see the older guys supporting them. And they absolutely loved it. The 7th grade team and the 8th grade team, when those varsity guys would walk in the gym for one of their big games against Christian or Latin or whomever it may be, you could see their eyes light up. And every time they score a basket, you see the varsity guys in the crowd cheering them on or whatnot. So I think, that's one of the big things that we tried to do. We tried to lay that foundation and make it strong and not only build skills, but also build excitement about the program.
Well, I know when you were doing that, my son Colby was at UNC Charlotte. He was the director of basketball operations at the time, and he was in charge of the summer teen camps. And he used to always tell me that, Coach Terry would bring his middle school, his JV, his varsity, and you brought numerous teams to team camp. So you were trying to build the foundation from the ground up, from that middle school level going up to the high school, which is what you have to do.
Yep, exactly. Because we wanted them to feel a part of the program.
Right.
We didn't want it to feel like four separate teams. We wanted, once you put that Country Day jersey on, even if you were a seventh grader, we wanted you to feel a part of the basketball program. And we wanted you to have that motivation to continue to get better, to one day be on the varsity team. So even, at team camp, things like that, just time outside of the court where those guys may be walking from one gym to another gym, the conversation you would see with the middle school guys and the high school guys, you enjoyed that because you knew it was building that relationship. And it also brought them to our games as well, because now from the summertime, they had that relationship with those older guys. They wanted to see them play. So now they're coming to the JV and the varsity games, building that culture.
Now, Coach, we talked about the conference, how tough it is, and also the quality of coaches. Now, Sean Brown, Chris Berger, Brian Field, three of the top coaches in the state of North Carolina, regardless. And like you said, X's and O's. When you go play them, no matter the talent level, you're in for a battle, and I don't care how good you are. Now, in 2014, Coach, out of all these coaches, you won Coach of the Year. What did that mean to you?
That was an outstanding honor, and I'll be honest, I was really surprised when I received the phone call. I'll never forget. I was in the parking lot waiting for my son. He was finishing up church league basketball practice, and when I received that phone call, I was just surprised because I knew the caliber of coaches that were in our conference, and for them to honor me with that achievement that year, I said, "Wow!" And it motivated me to want to even get better. Because at that point, receiving that honor for Coach of the Year, I knew that I was on the right track. And those guys pushed me. Those guys got the most out of me because I knew that we had to be ready each night. So I would see when they would scout, I would see them in the crowd, and I would try to, I'm coaching our game, but I'm also observing Brian Field sitting in the top right corner of the bleachers. And Brian, he and I would talk. He was so thorough with his scouting. He could watch you run a play and draw the play up after only see it one time. He could draw it up right there on his notepad and have it down. So he and I sometimes would be together, maybe scouting a Sean Brown or a Chris Berger, and just taking mental notes of how those guys did things. It really pushed me. So in 2 or 3 years after having that position at Country Day, I was a completely different coach just from being around those guys and our preseason coaches meeting and our postseason coaches meeting, hearing the things that they would talk about that they were doing in practice, things that they were doing in their off-season workouts. That made me a better coach. So I think when I received the award that year, I owe those guys a lot of credit because they really pushed me and sharpened me and made me elevate my game as a coach to where now, going forward, I feel like that because of the experiences I had going against them forward. But it was a huge honor to be amongst that group and for them to have me nominated or voted me as Coach of the Year.
Well, when you're going against those guys, you can't help but become a better coach.
Absolutely. Because there is no off night for those guys.
Off nights. None at all.
None.
Now, Coach, the other thing that I thought was very impressive, and we know the high academic standards at Charlotte Country Day, it's not easy to get in there as far as academics, and also the tuition is not for the faint of heart. But that being said, you've been at Charlotte Country Day for 10 years. 7 of those years, you made the state playoffs. And in 2018 and 2019, you made the quarterfinals of the state playoffs.
Yes, that's, the goal when we first got to Country Day as a staff was to be in that top 12 of the state. And at the time, there were over 22, 23 teams that were eligible for the state playoffs. So you had to finish in that top half. When we talk about how tough our conference is, but then when you step outside of the conference, you got Greensboro Day with Freddie Johnson, you got Christ School and Ravenscroft with Coach Billerman. Like, the state is just so competitive. At the time, Coach Gatlin was at Wesleyan. So we knew it was going to be challenging finishing in that top 12. So our goal was to initially, let's be a consistent state qualifier for the playoffs. And hopefully we can build on that. by making that top 12 consistent, we felt like that would breed a winning mindset, and that guys would slowly but surely start to feel like, okay, now that we've made the playoffs, maybe we can take that next step. And as we began to make the playoffs consistently, after the third or fourth year of just qualifying for the playoffs, the goal then became, okay, now we want to advance. We want to try to finish in that top 8, so hopefully we can host the playoff game and then be able to get out of the first round. And then having players help. We talk about having talent. So the Alex Tabors, the D'Angelo Epps, the Rylan McLaurens, those guys made it possible for that to happen. And they actually believe that not only can we qualify for the playoffs, but we can advance. But it's tough, to qualify. You had to beat some good teams. And those teams like Metrolina Christian with Coach Mike Wilson, those are competitive teams. And we knew that we're battling with those teams to get into that top 12. We knew at the time our program wasn't at the level of a Greensboro Day or a High Point Wesleyan. So that wasn't really our goal at the time. We were trying to beat out those other teams that were going to be in that 11th or 12th or 13th area. But it took a lot of off-season work. And so once we started qualifying for the playoffs, guys had that playoff experience to where it wasn't just an achievement to be there. Now, to be satisfied, we wanted to advance. And when we finally did that in 2018, there was such an excitement around the program, because now the question was, well, how far can we take this? And so in 2018, when we advanced to the quarterfinals, we ran up against a strong Wesleyan team. Aaron Wiggins, and those guys with Jalen Horde, they just had too much for us. But we knew that we had taken the next step. So the following year, in 2019, we advanced to the quarterfinals again. Well, we had to travel to Greensboro Day to go against Freddie Johnson. But I saw the growth, because even in that game against Greensboro Day, although we lost, we were up going into the fourth quarter.
Wow.
And so you could still feel that excitement of, wow, maybe we can keep this going. Now, we had a strong senior class, so we graduated, all of our starting 5. So the following year was a rebuilding year. But, I think we were trending in the right direction as far as growth as a program, right, successfully.
Now, Coach, in 2019, you also had a first for the school. You made the Charlotte Observer Sweet 16. What did that mean to you in the program?
That was big. That was another one of our goals, because we wanted to be recognized in the area as one of the top teams. And so we knew there were certain games. We'd go into the season and we'd circle certain games saying, guys, we need to win these games if we want the respect of the voters. And the players would talk about that. The players would say, Coach, when are they going to put us in the Sweet 16, or when are we going to get the respect that we're looking for? And I would tell them, I'd be honest with them and say, guys, we have to win certain games. There are certain games that we cannot lose. So when we finally cracked the polls that year, and that was the year in the regular season where we beat Greensboro Day and Christ School, almost in back-to-back weeks, and then we cracked the Sweet 16, you could see the expression of the guys that all the hard work had paid off. They finally felt like they had gotten the respect that they wanted. But like I told them, guys, it comes with winning. Nobody's going to give us any respect if we're not winning games. But they had knocked off 2 strong teams, and to finally make that poll, that trickles down to the JV, because they notice that. The guys at the middle school see that. So now they want to keep that going. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't realize until the end of the season that it was the first time we had been in the Sweet 16 in school history.
Wow.
There was a write-up on our school athletic website, and I believe it's still up there now, and it was a winter season wrap-up. And I'm reading through it, and then it says in the article that, the Bucks entered the Sweet 16 for the first time in history. And I said, wow, it caused us to reflect back on that season and say, that's another huge accomplishment that we had that the school had never achieved before. To be included in the public and privates as one of the top teams in the area. So we tried to use that momentum going forward to continue to motivate not just the players, but also us as coaches, to continue to motivate us to get better, knowing now that, okay, people see us as one of the top programs in the area.
Now, Coach, you had another first for the school, and it's hard to believe that in the existence of Charlotte Country Day that you've had no players make All-State. And during your tenure there,
Yeah.
I was going to say, in your tenure there, you had D'Angelo Epps and also Alex Tabor make All-State. What did that mean to you?
That was another huge accomplishment because the state is so loaded with talented players. It was an achievement at that time to even make all conference because around that time, Providence Day was loaded with their guys, with Dotson and Grant and Wirtz and those guys. Charlotte Christian and Latin had talent. Covenant Day was in the conference, and Cannon had a lot of good players. So to even make all conference was a huge achievement, let alone all state. So when D'Angelo Epps was up for all state, and we knew at some point in the season he may have a legitimate shot at making this, we had to go back and do our research to see, well, when was the last time a Country Day player has been voted all state? And I believe it was 2001, Sam Burrell, like way 16 years, 17 years ago. And we didn't realize it had been that long since a Country Day player had been on the all-state team. And, D'Angelo didn't know if he would make it or not either. And I would tell him, look, guy, I mean, there's a lot of talented players. Jalen LeCue was at Christ School at the time. I said, so, I don't know, you may have a shot, but don't get your hopes up too high. But when the voting finally came out, and I forgot who the conference rep was that year in our state meeting, but when we received the text message that he was voted all state. And if you look at the all state team that year, all 10 guys were Division I players. So everybody on that team ended up playing Division I basketball somewhere. So that was a huge accomplishment because it was a representation of the program and the direction that we were heading in. Obviously, it was great for D'Angelo because his recruiting took off. But that was good to have that achievement as the program, another feather in our hat, showing that we were heading in the right direction. And then the following year, Alex Tabor, outstanding kid, lights out shooter who's now playing at SMU. For him to be voted all state. So for us to have those two guys back-to-back seasons, and they were 1,000-point scorers as well, it really started putting our program on the map. And we felt like at that point, all the hard work we had done in the previous 7 or 8 years, we were seeing the rewards from it. And guys before them, Michael Wyatt and Matthew Spears and Ben Simmons, Wake Hamilton, those guys were laying the foundation because they were doing that grind work when we were building the programs. They were laying down the blueprint. And those were some of the guys that these younger guys had watched growing up. And so now to see that the program was in a very good space, was really satisfying.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, how difficult it is even to make all conference, because if you go back and look at some of the teams that's been at Providence Day, think of the year they won the state championship. Grant Williams, who's now with the Boston Celtics. You have Devon Dotson, who just finished his career at Kansas, is going to be in the NBA. You have Trey Wirtz. You have Isaac Johnson, and you have Josh Howard. You had 5 Division I players just off their team. And then just this past year, just look at the loaded roster that Jay Roth has over at Cannon. Again, you got a roster of all D1 caliber kids. That being said, Coach, you've had tremendous success in the past 10 years at Charlotte Country Day. And I think a lot of people, including myself, we were a little bit shocked by the news that you had resigned this past season. What went into the decision-making process to make that announcement?
Again, I had been there for 10 years, and like you said, we had pretty good success. I did feel like I was getting to the point where I was starting to feel ready to move on and take on some other challenges. 10 years is that's a decade, so I had been there for quite some time. And I felt like, let me try to get my feet into some other experiences. And I don't know if it's go to another independent school or maybe go back to public school and coach, try to get a position there. So I felt like my time was winding down just from a personal standpoint, and I wanted to move on to something else. The the last season wasn't one of our better seasons. We knew going into the season it was going to be a rebuilding year because we had graduated our entire starting five. So we knew that it wasn't going to be one of our better seasons. But with the lack of success that year, you know, you could sense there was some frustration. And there were some things that went on that year that kind of showed me, instead of trying to see this out another year or two, maybe it's probably better for me to step down now. So I wanted to go out on a positive note. And you know, it's funny how it worked because the previous 2 years, we were extremely successful. And then we had this rebuilding year last year where we were a very inexperienced team because we didn't have anybody who had really played before. You know, I thought we had a few guys who were talented, like Noah Carver, Jackson Crisco, but they had never been in those positions before of actually being in the forefront. And so what we had actually done, we had circled the next year, which would be this upcoming year, as, okay, this will be the year when we get back to where we were, because this past year is just about getting game experience. Let these guys get game experience. Next year, they'll be ready to lead us back to where we were. But it just didn't work out that way. And so there was some frustrations around the program and about things that were happening. And, you know, me being my alma mater, I didn't want to see things get to a point where, you know, it got ugly, so to speak. So I figured for the sake of the program, it may be better that I step down now. You know, even though that year was an outlier, and sometimes, you know, the most recent year, people will use that as their perspective of the program. When in, like you said, the year before, we had been in the Sweet 16 for the first time in school history. So hopefully people don't view last year as a summary of what the program had been the 10 years, you know, before that. Hopefully people view that as just an outlier. And we're having some wonderful facilities being built on campus. You know, I kind of looked at that as another kind of reason for change as well, like a new gym being built. It's going to be a state-of-the-art facility. Maybe this is a good time for a new program head to come in and you know, add a fresh start to the program. And I can move on somewhere else, which I was thinking of doing anyway. It just happened to come a year earlier than I anticipated. But I'm hoping that I left the program but that was mainly my reason for stepping down this year.
Well, Coach, like I said, in 10 years, 7 years, you went to the state playoffs. In 2018, 2019, you made it to the quarterfinals. You made the Sweet 16 in 2019. You had 2 players back-to-back All-State. I think, you know, you're very humble and you're very professional. You should be, you know, noted. You're very commendable for basically taking the high road. And that speaks volume on you as a person and as well as a basketball coach. Let me ask you this. How do you want to be remembered as a basketball coach at Charlotte Country Day?
Hopefully I'm remembered as someone who cared about their players. One of my biggest things, I wanted to make sure that I had good relationship with all of my players, whether it be basketball, off the court, because me being a teacher there as well, I see those guys during the day in the hallway. Some of the guys I actually had in my math class. So I'm hoping that I'll be remembered as a coach who really cared about his players. And I think you see that when players graduate and they come back to visit, they come back for the alumni game, they come back to basketball games, home games to support the program. I think that's an indication of the kind of relationship that you had when guys will call you and want to put you down as a reference because now they're graduating from college and they're applying for a job and they want to use you as a reference. I think that's also another indication of the type of relationships that you had. And I would try to work my butt off for guys who wanted to play at the next level to reach out to coaches, to build those relationships with college coaches, to promote guys, creating highlight videos. So I hope people remember all of those things as me as a coach, really caring for their players and wanting to see them do their best. And I think that, I tried my best. I'm not saying I was perfect. Obviously, there are things that we can always get, improve on or learn from. But I feel like I tried my best as far as promoting guys, whether it be through social media or whatnot, trying to get them into certain camps. A few of the guys have been in your camps, and I want to thank you for that. But they had to earn that. So I hope that I'm remembered as a coach who really tried to look out and care for their players. And that was my biggest thing. Regardless of the wins and losses, I wanted to make sure that the players were taken care of. And those guys that went on to play in college, I hope they feel like that I was instrumental in that as far as reaching out to coaches. And, I still have a great relationship with pretty much all the players that I've coached to this day. I can't think of any player that I've coached that I don't really have a good relationship with. So I hope that's something that continues and that people remember that.
Well, Coach, I've known you for some time, and you're very articulate. You're very professional. You have a great attitude. I think your personality is what sells you as a person, as a coach. But I've been impressed with the positive outlook that you've had, even during this situation and transition, as far as your point in your life where you're going from being a head coach at Charlotte Country Day to that next step in your journey. That being said, how would you describe yourself as a person and also as a coach?
That's a great question. I hope that I'm a humble person. I hope that I'm a grateful, a thankful person. I try to be a hard worker. And I always want to try to give myself goals to achieve, to keep myself motivated to do the next thing. And that's where I'm at right now at this point in my career. I definitely want to continue coaching at some point. I don't know whether that'll be next year, or if I do coach next year, whether that'll be as an assistant or a head coach. My oldest son is a senior. And the thing about that, him being a senior this year, I've never really had the chance to sit and just watch him play. His freshman and sophomore year, he was at Independence playing for Coach Davis, and I was obviously coaching at Country Day, so I missed a lot of his games. And even though he played for me this year at Country Day, there's a big difference in coaching him versus actually sitting and watching him play.
Right.
So him going into his last year of high school, I've had times where I've thought maybe I just sit and watch and enjoy his senior year of high school,
Right.
and then get back into coaching the following year. Or, I don't know what school he's going to end up at now, but maybe I end up being an assistant at that school. I'm still not the head guy, so I'm still getting a chance more so to watch him. I've talked to several schools. Several coaches have invited me to be on their staff, as an assistant. So I may just do that and take another year of learning some more before I step back into another head coaching position. So right now, I haven't really decided on what I'm going to do next. I do know I'm going to get back into coaching. I just don't know if it's going to be next year or the following year. And if I do get back into it this year, haven't really decided what role I want to play, or if it's just watching my oldest son play his senior year out. But, I'm having fun during this transition period. I'm watching a lot of basketball film. I'll be up late at night watching YouTube videos of games in the 1970s, 1980s, just still trying to learn. And I still talk to coaches now who are preparing for their off-season events. So still picking the brains of coaches, still trying to learn more, that once I get back into it, I'm ready to go and hit the ground running.
Well, my suggestion to anyone who's looking for a coach, either as a head coach or an assistant coach, is to give Dwayne Cherry a call, because you're one of the most professional and enthusiastic coaches that I've been around in quite some time.
Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you for your friendship and support over the years. You've done a tremendous job. Your record speaks for itself. Not only does your record speak for itself, but it's the way you carry yourself. And you've always been very humble. You've taken the high road. And, that being said, that speaks volume. And from Phenom Hoops, we just want to say thank you for coming on Coach's Corner today to basically tell your story, your journey along the way.
Well, Coach, thank you so much for having me. And I thank you as well for your friendship. You've been very helpful during my 10 years at coaching at Charlotte Country Day. I've learned a lot from you as well. You know, I've been to your camps and your events and seen how you run things as well, being very professional yourself, building your organization from the ground up and seeing how successful you are. That speaks kudos to you as well as a person and as well as a worker. So thank you as well for laying down the blueprint for not just me, but a lot of coaches in this area, I'm sure would say the same thing about you as well. So I want to thank you, not only for that, but also for having me on today as well.
Thank you, Coach. I appreciate it.
Thank you.